What Albert Einstein really said about health. When you think of Albert Einstein, chances are you picture the wild hair, the chalkboard equations, and maybe that iconic tongue-out photo. But what if I told you that behind the physics and the fame, Einstein also left behind a quiet legacy of wisdom about something far more personal: health. Now, to be clear, Albert Einstein wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a biologist, a nutritionist, or a yogi, but he was deeply human, curious, reflective, and he had a lot to say about how we live, think, and care for our bodies and minds, sometimes directly and often indirectly. So in this video, we're diving into everything Albert Einstein ever said about health, in his own words, and what we can learn from them today. Part 1. Einstein's view on simplicity and balance. Let's start with one of Einstein's most famous lines. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. This quote has been echoed across industries, from engineering to education, but it resonates especially deeply when applied to health. We live in a time where wellness advice is a constant fire hose. There's keto versus paleo versus vegan, cold plunges, sauna stacking, sleep trackers, biohacking routines with 17 steps. 1 week it's high protein, the next it's plant-based. Do more, do less, fast longer, eat sooner. It's dizzying. But Einstein offers us a counterpoint. Make it simple, not simplistic, not careless, but essential. Strip away the noise and get to the heart of what matters. When it comes to our health, how we nourish ourselves, how we rest, how we think, the path is often clearer than we pretend. We just bury it under layers of overthinking. Einstein was famous for cutting through complexity, not because he didn't understand it, but because he understood it too well. He once said, "Any intelligent fool can make things bigger, more complex. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction." This courage to simplify wasn't just intellectual. It showed up in his lifestyle. Einstein reportedly kept a closet full of nearly identical gray suits. He didn't want to waste mental energy choosing what to wear every morning, a concept now echoed by people like Steve Jobs and Barack Obama. This idea, reducing unnecessary decisions, is powerful for mental health. In psychology, it's called decision fatigue, and it's very real. The more trivial choices we face daily, the less clarity and energy we have for the important ones. In that way, Einstein was practicing wellness long before we had language for it. He was also famously low maintenance when it came to his surroundings. His desk was cluttered, but his lifestyle was stripped down. No flash, no obsession with status or appearance. Just deep work, quiet routines, and time to think. And here's the thing, that kind of simplicity protects our nervous system. When our lives are overrun by noise, from tech, from information, from relentless schedules, our bodies stay in a constant state of low-grade stress. Cortisol spikes, sleep suffers, digestion slows, even our decision-making ability takes a hit. Simplicity, in contrast, allows us to come home to ourselves. It quiets the background noise so we can hear what's really going on, physically, mentally, emotionally. Einstein modeled this by choosing stillness and space over stimulation. He didn't chase productivity in the modern sense. He valued depth over speed. And in that space, he created some of the most important scientific breakthroughs of all time. Let that sink in. The man who reshaped our understanding of the universe made space to think. And that space was possible because his life wasn't cluttered. There's also an emotional side to simplicity that Einstein hints at in various writings. He once said, "A table, a chair, a bowl of fruit and a violin. What else does a man need to be happy?" It's poetic, but it's also profound. The essentials: good food, music, peace, thought. That's not a rejection of ambition. It's a radical prioritization of what nourishes us. In terms of wellness, this becomes a compass. Instead of chasing fads, we can ask, what actually makes me feel better? What's essential? What's noise? Where am I overcomplicating things? Simplicity doesn't mean doing less for your health. It means focusing on what actually works and letting go of the rest. For Einstein, simplicity was not a minimalist aesthetic or a productivity hack. It was a way of aligning with truth. And in a health space full of extremes, confusion and contradiction, it's one of the most healing ideas we can adopt. Part 2, on food, diet, and vegetarianism. Here's where it gets interesting. Einstein didn't just think deeply about time, space, and physics. He also thought deeply about food. And not just in terms of physical health, but in terms of ethics, sustainability, and the human condition. Later in life, he adopted a mostly vegetarian diet. In a letter from 1954, just a year before his death, he wrote, "So I am living without fats, without meat, without fish, but am feeling quite well this way. It always seems to me that man was not born to be a carnivore." It's a fascinating statement, especially coming from someone known more for formulas than food philosophies. But Einstein was never just a scientist. He was a deeply curious, reflective human being, and his views on diet evolved as his worldview deepened. Even earlier, in a 1930 letter to a friend, he confessed, "I have always eaten animal flesh with a somewhat guilty conscience." That line speaks volumes. He wasn't trying to posture or moralize. He wasn't trying to be perfect. He was simply acknowledging the conflict many of us feel. The tug of war between habit, culture, pleasure, and conscience. Einstein admired thinkers like Gandhi, who promoted ahimsa, non-violence in all forms, including what we eat. And while Einstein's own diet wasn't strictly vegan or raw or restrictive in the way modern labels demand, it was driven by a desire to do less harm, both to his body and to the world around him. In fact, he made one of his most powerful health-related statements later in life. "Nothing will benefit human health and increase chances for survival of life on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet." That's a bold claim, but it wasn't rooted in moral superiority. It was based on observation, on ethics, and on a growing awareness of how interconnected everything really is. Remember, this was the 1940s and 50s, long before documentaries, long before regenerative agriculture, factory farming debates, or climate crisis headlines. Einstein was simply ahead of his time. He recognized that food isn't just fuel, it's philosophy, it's ecology, it's a mirror of our values. What we eat has ripple effects on animals, on ecosystems, on our own clarity, energy, and mood. And while Einstein wasn't dogmatic, there's evidence he may have eaten fish or meat occasionally when offered, especially earlier in life. The direction of his thinking was clear, toward plants, toward simplicity, and toward conscience. That idea, eating with awareness, is more relevant now than ever. Modern science backs much of what Einstein intuited. A mostly plant-based diet is linked to lower risks of heart disease, certain cancers, and inflammation. It supports better digestion, longevity, and even emotional well-being. And from an environmental standpoint, shifting even partially away from meat-heavy diets significantly reduces our carbon footprint. But Einstein wasn't doing it for trends or tracking metrics. He didn't have an app telling him how many almonds to eat or whether he was in ketosis. He was simply asking, what feels aligned? And that's something we can all take from him. Not a prescription, but a prompt. Are we eating with intention? Are our choices in harmony with our values? Are we fueling our bodies in a way that also supports our long-term vitality and the world we live in? It's not about perfection. Einstein himself never claimed that. It's about awareness. One more thing that's rarely mentioned. Einstein reportedly had a sweet tooth. He liked honey. He wasn't rigid. And that's important too. Because balance, not purity, is where sustainable wellness lives. We don't need to moralize food, but we do need to consider it, as Einstein did, through the lens of ethics, science, and care. And perhaps the most revolutionary part, he connected personal health to collective survival. He understood, long before most of us did, that the future of our planet is tied to what's on our plates. That's not just about being a vegetarian, it's about being conscious, and that's something we can all start practicing, no matter where we are on the food spectrum. Part 3, on movement and nature. There's no record of Einstein doing CrossFit, counting steps, or tracking his macros, and yet his life quietly reflected some of the most foundational truths about movement and its impact on well-being. Einstein didn't exercise for aesthetics. He wasn't chasing a six-pack, but he moved, regularly, purposefully, and instinctively. He walked. A lot. Einstein famously never learned to drive. Even when cars were available and common, he preferred to walk or bike wherever he could. It wasn't just a practical choice, it was a mental one. Walking gave him space to think, to imagine, to feel. One of his most quoted lines, "I thought of that while riding my bicycle." This was his answer when asked how he came up with the theory of relativity. Let that sink in. The theory that changed physics forever, born while cycling. It's such a simple image, a man on a bike moving through the world with no distraction, no noise, just rhythm. And in that space, something cosmic emerged. Today, neuroscience confirms what Einstein already understood intuitively. Physical movement enhances mental clarity. It boosts creativity. It improves memory, cognition, and emotional regulation. The very act of walking increases communication between brain hemispheres, something especially important for creative problem solving. Modern research even shows that movement is not separate from thinking, it's part of it. So when we sit stagnant for hours, scrolling or glued to screens, and wonder why our minds feel dull or anxious, we're going against something Einstein lived by, the importance of motion. But it wasn't just movement for the sake of movement, it was movement in nature. Einstein had a deep reverence for the natural world, not just as a scientist, but as a human being. In a letter he once wrote, "Look deep into nature, and then you will understand everything better." That quote alone could be a meditation. It's a reminder that wisdom doesn't just live in books or labs or data sets. It lives in trees, in clouds, in the changing of the seasons, in the silence of the forest or the curve of a shoreline. Nature isn't just something out there, it's the original blueprint. And when we realign with it, when we breathe real air, when we watch the sunrise, when we walk instead of scroll, we remember something essential. Einstein knew this. His best ideas came during walks by the lake, or while gazing out the window, or on a quiet bike ride. He didn't sit in front of a whiteboard forcing genius. He let his mind move with his body. He created space, and nature filled it. He also spoke of the humility that nature brings. In one letter, he said, "A human being is part of the whole called by us universe. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness." This wasn't just poetic, it was practical. Einstein believed that the ego, when unchecked, separates us not only from each other, but from nature and from our own well-being. He saw reconnection with the natural world as a way to dissolve that delusion. Today, we know the nervous system responds powerfully to time in nature. Studies show that just 20 minutes outdoors lowers cortisol levels, improves immune function, and enhances mood. Walking in green spaces improves attention and reduces symptoms of anxiety and depression. It turns out Einstein didn't need an Oura ring or a fitness tracker. He just listened. He didn't optimize his health. He aligned with the rhythms of life. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway here. You don't need to lift heavy or sprint or biohack your body to be well. You need movement, space, stillness, and something real to look at. A tree, a mountain, a street corner touched by sunlight. Because health isn't always in the gym. It's in the walk to nowhere. It's in letting your thoughts wander while your feet do the same. It's in trading noise for birdsong, blue light for dusk. Einstein didn't live in pursuit of fitness. He lived in pursuit of truth. And truth for him often came on 2 feet or 2 wheels, with the world unfolding quietly around him. Part 4, on calm, balance, and mental clarity. Here's where Einstein starts to feel eerily modern, not because he talked like a wellness influencer, but because his life reflected something that so many of us are starving for today: peace. He wasn't just a genius of physics. He was also a quiet philosopher of the inner world. And if you look at his habits, his quotes, and the way he moved through life, you start to notice a pattern. Einstein craved solitude. He resisted fame. He disliked noise. He lived quite intentionally slowly. He once wrote, "A calm and modest life brings more happiness than the pursuit of success combined with constant restlessness." That quote didn't come from a podium or a scientific paper. It came from a handwritten note he gave to a bellboy at a hotel in Tokyo in 1922. It was meant as a tip, a token of appreciation when he had no cash in hand. That little note was later auctioned for over $1.5 million. But its value is way beyond money. It's a blueprint. And it hits even harder now. In an age of hustle culture, biohacking, endless productivity tips, and mental fatigue dressed up as ambition. Einstein, even at the height of his fame, believed in less. Less noise, less chasing, less chaos. He saw that calm wasn't just a nice to have. It was essential to creativity, well-being, and clarity. He once described how he found joy in the simplest things: playing violin, sitting in silence, walking, reading. He wrote about how complexity, when it comes to life, often clouds our thinking, and how modesty, both in lifestyle and in spirit, brings us closer to truth. In other words, mental and emotional health aren't side quests. They're the foundation. And while Einstein didn't use modern language like nervous system regulation or dopamine detox, his life reflected exactly that. He guarded his attention. He didn't overstimulate. He trusted stillness. And then there's this line, deceptively simple, but packed with modern relevance. The human spirit must prevail over technology. Let's just sit with that. He said this decades before smartphones, social media, or screen addiction, before dopamine loops, blue light blockers, and content overload. And yet, he saw it coming. He understood the danger of letting external tools outpace internal awareness, of building faster machines without cultivating slower minds, of outsourcing our sense of well-being to gadgets, algorithms, and trends. Today, that quote could easily be interpreted as a reminder to reconnect, not just with nature, as we talked about earlier, but with ourselves. To reconnect with our thoughts, unfiltered by apps, our feelings, unmuted by distraction, our breath, unmeasured by devices. Einstein knew that stillness wasn't laziness. It was power. It was where great ideas came from, where wisdom came from, and arguably where health begins. Because think about it, how often do we ignore stress until it turns into burnout? How often do we chase productivity until our sleep, digestion, or mood crashes? How often do we keep running, scrolling, consuming, just to avoid sitting with ourselves? Einstein did the opposite. He made space for reflection, for silence, for just being. And again, modern science is only now catching up. We now know that chronic stress is one of the most damaging things to the body. It suppresses immunity, disrupts digestion, fuels inflammation, shortens telomeres, and affects brain function. Constant input, multitasking, and hyperstimulation all increase cortisol and reduce our capacity to think clearly or feel present. On the flip side, practices like deep breathing, stillness, and even daydreaming restore nervous system balance, boost creativity, and improve long-term health. Einstein was living that truth long before it was measured in clinical studies. He wasn't always calm. He had strong opinions, a complicated personal life, and moments of intense pressure. But he prioritized balance. He valued peace. And he lived like someone who understood that the mind needs rest in order to be brilliant. So what can we learn from that? Maybe that health isn't found in pushing harder, it's found in pulling back, in giving our minds a break from input overload, in embracing boredom as a doorway to clarity, in choosing simplicity over stimulation, calm over constant chasing. Because clarity, as Einstein showed, doesn't come from doing more. It comes from being still enough to see what's true. And that kind of clarity is a form of health most of us are desperately missing. Part 5. On habits, routine, and self-discipline. Einstein may have reshaped our understanding of time and space, but in his daily life, he was grounded in something very simple: routine. He was a creature of habit in the most literal sense. He wore the same style of clothes nearly every day: a gray suit, often a sweater, no socks. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't want to waste mental energy on trivial decisions. Today, we call this decision fatigue, and modern psychology backs it up. The brain burns a surprising amount of energy deciding between options. So the more small decisions we eliminate, the more bandwidth we have for creative and meaningful thinking. Einstein understood this instinctively. His wardrobe was minimal, his schedule was predictable, he ate at the same times, took the same walking routes, worked in rhythmic blocks of time. There was an elegant simplicity to how he moved through the day, and this wasn't about being rigid, it was about being intentional. His life wasn't chaotic or rushed. It had structure, it had rhythm. And that rhythm, much like music or nature, gave space for brilliance. So what does that have to do with health? A lot, because we now know that the human body and brain crave stability. That circadian rhythms aren't just about sleep. They regulate digestion, hormones, mood, and mental clarity. That consistent meal timing can improve insulin sensitivity. That morning sunlight sets the tone for alertness, and evening quiet prepares the body for rest. Routines aren't boring, they're biological. And Einstein seemed to sense this long before we had studies and graphs to prove it. He also didn't glorify discipline for its own sake. He wasn't a stoic monk. He enjoyed food, music, laughter, and ideas. But he built his days with a kind of quiet discipline that supported freedom, not restricted it. And that's an important distinction, because too often today we associate health with control, with rigid plans, strict protocols, or punishment. But Einstein's version of discipline was different. It wasn't aggressive. It was gentle, sustainable, a rhythm that made his mind feel free. There's even a fascinating anecdote here. After Einstein's death, his brain was removed and studied, a decision steeped in controversy. But what researchers eventually found wasn't so much about the size of his brain, but its structure. It had unusually strong connections between regions, particularly in the corpus callosum, the part that connects the left and the right hemispheres. Now, was that due to genetics? Possibly. But could his lifestyle, built on consistency, focus, and deep work, have helped shape or strengthen those connections? We can't say for sure, but we do know this. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, is profoundly shaped by behavior. Daily habits, repeated over time, physically change the brain. They sculpt attention. They reinforce emotional patterns. They either support resilience or wear it down. And in that light, Einstein's daily rhythm wasn't just a preference. It was a form of health maintenance, a cognitive scaffold. He once said, "Intellectual growth should commence at birth and cease only at death." That's not a quote about talent. It's a quote about practice, about showing up every day, about making space for deep thought, about trusting the compound interest of small, repeated actions. Because that's what habits really are, votes for the person you want to become. And Einstein, whether he knew it or not, lived by that truth. His genius didn't arrive in bursts of inspiration. It was cultivated through rhythm, through structure, through showing up again and again, even when the work was hard. So if you're trying to build a healthier life, physically, mentally, emotionally, take a page from Einstein's book. Don't obsess over perfect plans. Build steady patterns. Wake up at the same time. Eat in rhythm. Make space for stillness. Choose clothes that don't drain your mental energy. Walk the same route if it helps you think. Let your habits serve you, not overwhelm you. Because sometimes, the most revolutionary thing you can do for your health is something incredibly ordinary. Like doing it again tomorrow. Part 6. On moderation. And that pipe. Alright, let's talk about something a little more complicated. Einstein's pipe. Yep. The brilliant man, champion of reason and reflection, was famously known for smoking a pipe. In fact, he once said, "I believe that pipe smoking contributes to a somewhat calm and objective judgment in all human affairs." Now, let's be clear up front. This isn't health advice. Today, we know the dangers of smoking: lung disease, cancer, cardiovascular risks. The science is settled, and by no means are we glorifying a habit that we now understand to be harmful. But let's zoom out, because what Einstein's pipe actually represents might be something bigger than tobacco. It might reflect a mindset, one that's desperately rare today: the pursuit of calm, the act of intentional slowing, the value of contemplation in a hyper-reactive world. When Einstein spoke about the pipe bringing calm and objectivity, what he was really saying is this: clarity doesn't come from rushing, it comes from pausing. Think about the era he lived in. No smartphone, no Slack, no social media, no 24/7 breaking news cycle. Distractions existed, sure, but not like they do now. And even then, Einstein felt the need to carve out stillness. He actively chose moments of solitude, quiet rituals, and thoughtful slowness, whether it was walking, tinkering, daydreaming, or yes, smoking that pipe. The point isn't the pipe, it's the pause. It's the intentional stepping away from the noise, to breathe, to think, to feel, to recalibrate your nervous system, to zoom out and see clearly. In today's terms, we might replace the pipe with something else: a cup of tea, a long walk without your phone, a quiet journal session at the end of the day, even just 5 minutes of unstructured silence. Einstein was known for sitting silently for long stretches, sometimes with a faraway look in his eyes. People assumed he was being idle, but his brain was turning ideas over. He was letting thought breathe. That slowness was productive, not passive. It's worth noting that Einstein never advocated excess. He wasn't indulgent, he wasn't reckless. Even when he smoked, he did it moderately, often in solitude, as a way to mark thinking time. It wasn't about addiction, it was about ritual, and that's a lesson in itself. Because today, wellness can become another kind of frenzy, hyper-optimized, over-analyzed, always measured. We track sleep, count steps, gamify breathing. But sometimes health isn't in the data. It's in the relationship you have with your own attention. Moderation isn't just about food or alcohol. It's about technology, stimulation, pressure, self-judgment. It's about knowing when enough is enough and being okay with enough. So what do we take away from Einstein's pipe? Not the smoke, not the nicotine, but the ritual of reflection, the permission to pause, the understanding that wellness isn't about perfection. It's about presence. Einstein once said, "A table, a chair, a bowl of fruit, and a violin. What else does a man need to be happy?" That quote captures everything: simplicity, sensory joy, creativity, and a reminder that the basics, done with intention, are often enough. So maybe in a world that constantly demands more speed, more hustle, more output, true health lies in practicing less, in saying no, in choosing stillness, in making time for quiet judgment, in putting down the noise and picking up your thoughts. Einstein's pipe is gone, but the pause it symbolized, we need that now more than ever. Part 7. Einstein's legacy for today's health seekers. So what does all this mean for us? Einstein didn't write health manuals. He wasn't a guru. But if we gather his thoughts from personal letters, interviews, and habits, a picture emerges. one that surprisingly aligned with the modern holistic health movement. He taught us that simplicity is clarity, nature is a teacher, food choices matter, for us and the planet. Movement isn't just physical, it's mental. Calm is medicine, and health is both internal and external, body and mind. In one of his letters, Einstein wrote, "A human being is a part of the whole, called by us universe. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. That's the heart of wellness, understanding we're not separate, that our health is tied to our thoughts, our environment, our community, our ethics, everything." Einstein reminds us that health isn't just a diet or workout plan. It's a way of being. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by conflicting advice, maybe Einstein is the reminder you needed. You don't need more complexity. You need clarity, peace, rhythm, nature, thoughtfulness. And that's the journey we're on here at Uncounted. Thanks for watching and thinking with me. Subscribe for weekly podcasts on health, philosophy, and holistic living. Bye.